In the far reaches of the Milky Way, there was a mighty civilization known as the Galactic Empire. It had ruled for thousands of years and believed it knew everything about the universe. Every star system, every planet, every ancient ruin, and every alien race was carefully recorded in its massive digital archives. The Empire took great pride in its order, believing that nothing in the galaxy could surprise it anymore. But one ordinary day, something strange happened, something that made even the most confident commanders question everything they believed. It began with a signal. A faint, broken transmission appeared on the outer edge of the Empire's sensor network. The signal was weak and filled with static, but its pattern was unlike anything the Empire had seen before. The communication officers in the Imperial Command Center stared at their screens in confusion. At first, they thought it was just an error, maybe a reflection from a dying satellite or an old probe. But the signal kept repeating every few minutes, always the same strange pattern, almost like a distress call. It was coming from a region of space that, according to the Empire's records, did not exist. When the coordinates were checked, the technicians became nervous. The system name didn't appear in any file. The star maps showed only empty space. The officers double-checked their data, thinking it must be a system glitch, but the signal was real. It was alive and constant, echoing from a point beyond the edges of the known galaxy. For an empire that prided itself on perfection, the idea of something not in the records was terrifying. The news spread quickly through the ranks. High-ranking officials in the Imperial Council gathered in a massive chamber, filled with holographic projections of the galaxy. Every major sector was mapped and glowing, except for one small dark region, the source of the mysterious signal. Some admirals argued it was a trap, perhaps from an unknown enemy trying to lure them into an ambush. Others believed it could be a lost colony or an ancient Imperial outpost sending a distress signal after centuries of silence. The debate grew heated and fear began to rise. The Empire was built on control and knowledge, and now it faced something that defied both. The Emperor himself soon learned of the event. Sitting on his golden throne surrounded by advisors and military commanders, he listened in silence as the reports were read. His face remained calm, but his eyes betrayed curiosity and unease. He ordered a reconnaissance fleet to investigate the source immediately. "If the records are silent," he said, "then we shall write new ones." His voice was steady, but the hall was filled with tension. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone felt the same fear. If the Empire had missed something, what else could it be blind to? Within hours, a group of scout ships, sleek and silver, was dispatched into the unknown sector. The pilots were some of the best in the Empire, chosen for their courage and skill. They moved through deep space, crossing borders no Imperial ship had entered in hundreds of years. The further they went, the stranger the readings became. The stars seemed dimmer, and the space around them felt heavier, as if light itself was being swallowed by the darkness. The signal grew stronger and clearer, pulsing like a heartbeat, guiding them toward its source. Then suddenly the lead scout's sensors picked up something massive. Dozens of large objects were moving in formation, closing in fast. Before they could react, the communication line filled with static and screams. One by one, the scouts vanished from the radar. The command center received only fragments of their final transmissions. Panic, confusion, and a single chilling sentence. "It's not in our records." Then silence. When the fleet failed to report back, the Empire went into emergency mode. The Imperial Command activated Red Alert across all outer systems. Scientists were ordered to analyze the few seconds of data received before contact was lost. The results were terrifying. The energy readings from the unknown fleet were off the charts, beyond anything in Imperial science. The ships didn't match any known design, and their communication signals didn't belong to any known language. It was as if the attackers had come from another reality altogether. In the following days, fear spread through the Empire's military ranks. People whispered in corridors, officers argued behind closed doors, and technicians worked without sleep trying to decode the mystery. How could something exist that the Empire had no record of? Some older scholars spoke of ancient wars long forgotten, of civilizations erased from history because of the dangers they posed. Perhaps they suggested this enemy was one of them, a ghost from the past returning to settle an unfinished score. The Emperor called another meeting with his war council. The atmosphere was heavy, the air filled with nervous energy. Reports kept pouring in, Unexplained sensor distortions, missing ships, and faint echoes of the same signal coming from different parts of the galaxy. It was spreading. The Emperor's generals proposed launching a preemptive strike into the unknown, but others warned against it, arguing they didn't even know what they were fighting. In the end, the Emperor made his decision. The Imperial Navy would prepare for full-scale defense. Every shipyard was ordered to double production. Every fleet was to report to high alert. While the military prepared, the Empire's historians and data archivists worked in panic. They began digging into the oldest layers of their archives, the parts buried deep within the data vaults that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Some of these files were corrupted, others sealed by forgotten codes. After weeks of searching, they uncovered a strange fragment, an incomplete record from the dawn of the Empire. It spoke of a forbidden war, a conflict so terrible that the early rulers had ordered all evidence of it erased from history. No one knew why, but the resemblance to the new enemy was chilling. The symbols in the fragment matched the signal's pattern perfectly. The discovery shook the Council to its core. They realized the Empire wasn't facing a new enemy. It was facing one it had deliberately forgotten. The panic turned into dread. What kind of threat was so great that their ancestors had chosen to delete all memory of it? And if this enemy had returned after so many centuries, what did it want now? As the Imperial fleet assembled near the border, the mysterious signal changed tone. It was no longer a simple pulse, it became a message, long and rhythmic, like a countdown. The analyst translated the pattern, and the result froze everyone in the room. The message said only one thing: we remember. That simple phrase sent a chill through the Empire's heart. It meant that whatever this enemy was, it still carried the memory of what the Empire had done to it in the past. And now it had come back for vengeance. On the outer edge of the Empire's territory, millions of citizens watched the night sky, unaware of the true danger. The Imperial News Network told them only that a minor disturbance was being investigated. But deep inside the military bases, the truth was clear. An unrecorded force was coming, and the Empire was not ready. The officers stared at the holographic maps, the empty dark sector blinking red, and they understood something they had never considered before. Knowledge was not power if the truth had been erased. The Emperor stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the stars. He had seen empires rise and fall in history books, but he had never imagined his would tremble over a mystery. Behind him, his advisors whispered about mobilization and defense, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of known stars, an enemy waited. An enemy not in their records, but one that clearly remembered them. The silence of the void now felt alive, filled with secrets the Empire had buried long ago. And so the stage was set. The Empire, proud and powerful, faced a ghost from its own forgotten past. The panic had begun quietly, with a signal that shouldn't exist. But soon, it would grow into something much greater, something that would test the very core of the Galactic Empire's might. The galaxy was holding its breath, and the unknown was about to strike. The days following the disappearance of the scout fleet were filled with confusion and fear. The Galactic Empire, once so confident in its power, now found itself staring into an unknown darkness. The mysterious fleet that had destroyed the scouts was not just strong, it was completely unidentifiable. Every database, every record, and every historical archive failed to show even a single match. The Imperial scientists and strategists worked around the clock, but their efforts only deepened the mystery. The ship's energy readings were unnatural, their movement patterns unpredictable, and their language impossible to translate. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was truly afraid. Inside the Imperial Command Center, tension filled every corridor. Officers argued endlessly about what this new enemy could be. Some said it was a rebellion. Others believed it was an ancient species returning for revenge, and a few even whispered that it might not be from their universe at all. The Emperor's Council demanded answers, but there were none. All the Empire's knowledge and advanced computers could not explain what was happening. The unknown fleet had become a ghost story told in the war rooms, something beyond science, beyond understanding. Across the Empire's vast territories, rumors spread like wildfire. People began to panic. In the lower colonies, citizens claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky, moving faster than anything known to man. Spaceports reported missing freighters. Pilots told stories of ghostly ships appearing on their sensors for a moment, then vanishing without a trace. At first, the authorities dismissed these as mass hysteria, but soon the evidence became too strong to ignore. Something was moving in the shadows of space, something that was not in the records but seemed to know exactly where to strike. The Emperor held a private meeting with his top admirals and scientists. The atmosphere was grim. The holographic projection in the center of the room showed the galaxy map, and small red markers began appearing, each representing a lost patrol or a vanished ship. The pattern wasn't random. The enemy seemed to be surrounding Imperial space, cutting off trade routes and communication lines. One by one, the outer sectors went silent. The Empire's most powerful war machine was being isolated piece by piece, and no one understood how. Admiral Varen, one of the most respected commanders in the Empire, stood before the council. His face was pale, his voice cold. "They know our routes," he said quietly. "They know our patrol cycles, our communication frequencies. This isn't coincidence. They're studying us." His words hung heavy in the air. If this mysterious fleet could read Imperial tactics, then they were not new. They were familiar, perhaps too familiar. The thought that the Empire might be facing an old enemy, erased from history, sent a chill down everyone's spine. To uncover the truth, the Emperor ordered the formation of a special intelligence team called the Shadow Inquiry. Their mission was to dig into the oldest layers of the Empire's archives, searching for anything that could explain this new threat. The team included historians, cryptographers, and even retired admirals who remembered stories of wars that had been removed from the official record. Weeks passed as they decoded fragments of ancient data, piecing together what little survived from before the Empire's founding age. What they found was horrifying. Records of a war so catastrophic that entire planets had been destroyed. The enemy in those records was described as merciless, using technologies that defied physics. And their insignia matched perfectly with the faint markings seen on the mysterious ships now appearing in the galaxy. The revelation was devastating. The Empire had not discovered a new enemy. It had rediscovered one it had tried to erase. Long ago, in the early days of expansion, the Empire had fought a species known as the Varakthal. They were a race of machine-organic hybrids who believed that all intelligent life should be reborn into mechanical perfection. The war had nearly destroyed both sides, and the early emperors had ordered all memory of the Varakthal erased to prevent fear and rebellion in the future. But somehow the Varakthal had survived. They had hidden, rebuilt, and now returned stronger than ever. When the Shadow Inquiry presented their findings, the Imperial Council erupted into chaos. Some officers accused the historians of fabricating lies to cover up the military's failure. Others demanded immediate retaliation. But amid the shouting, one truth remained clear. The Varakthal were real and they were coming. The Emperor sat in silence, his mind racing. The decision before him was one no ruler wished to make. Admit to the people that the Empire had been hiding a great lie, or keep the truth buried and face the invasion in silence. Meanwhile, at the borders of Imperial space, fleets were already preparing for battle. Thousands of warships lined up, their hulls shining under the cold light of distant suns. The admirals tried to predict the enemy's next move, but it was useless. The Varakthal didn't fight like any known species. Their ships didn't follow formations or standard tactics. They moved like living beings, reacting instantly to changes, anticipating traps before they were even set. Imperial captains described it as fighting against the future itself. In the following weeks, the first real clashes began. Small skirmishes turned into full battles. The Empire's ships were equipped with advanced plasma cannons, shield barriers, and drone fighters, but none of it seemed to matter. The Varakthal weapons tore through Imperial defenses like paper. Whole fleets disappeared in hours. The Empire's greatest generals were forced to retreat, something that hadn't happened in centuries. For a civilization built on pride, every defeat was a wound to its spirit. Inside the command center, fear transformed into desperation. Reports flooded in, colonies destroyed, communication relays disabled, and entire planets going dark. The analysts studied the enemy's energy signatures, but they couldn't understand them. The Varakthal didn't use any known form of fuel or power source. Their ships seemed alive, growing and changing even in the middle of battle. Scientists theorized that they were self-repairing, possibly even sentient. The Empire's computers couldn't process such a concept. Machines weren't supposed to think. But these ones did. The Emperor ordered the mobilization of the full Imperial fleet. Billions of soldiers, thousands of ships, and hundreds of admirals prepared for war. Yet despite their strength, the sense of unease never left them. It wasn't just the enemy's power. It was the feeling that the Empire was fighting against something it had once known too well. Deep inside, everyone felt that this wasn't just a war for survival. It was a reckoning. In secret, the Shadow Inquiry continued to dig deeper into the archives. They found evidence that the early emperors had made a terrible mistake during the First War. To win, they had used forbidden weapons that tore space itself, destroying entire star systems. It was this act that enraged the Varakthal and caused them to vanish, vowing to return one day. Now that promise had come true. The erased war was returning to history, and no amount of data deletion could stop it. As the enemy fleet grew closer to Imperial borders, the tension reached its breaking point. Entire planets began to evacuate. The Empire's citizens watched the sky in fear, wondering if the lights above were stars or approaching ships. Military broadcasts tried to reassure them, claiming the Empire was in control, but the officers knew the truth. They were facing a force beyond their understanding. One evening, the Emperor stood before the massive holographic display of the galaxy. The unknown fleet was now visible on the edge of Imperial space, a dark wave moving with terrifying precision. The Emperor turned to Admiral Varen and said quietly, "What happens when knowledge fails us?" The Admiral had no answer. The Empire had always believed that information was the key to power. But now, faced with an enemy beyond the records, all that knowledge meant nothing. In the deep void between stars, the Varakthal fleet began transmitting a new signal, a haunting sound that filled every communication channel. No one could decode it, but those who heard it described it as a chorus of voices, mechanical yet filled with emotion. It was not a declaration of war, it was a reminder. The Empire's past had returned, and it would not be forgotten. By the end of that week, the Imperial borders were burning. Whole sectors fell silent. The Empire, once proud and unchallenged, was forced to admit the unthinkable. There were things even it could not control. The phrase, "It's not in our records," became a curse whispered across the stars. And as the unknown fleet advanced, one thought haunted everyone, from the Emperor himself to the lowest soldier in the trenches, that the galaxy was about to learn what happens when the forgotten past comes back with vengeance. The moment the Varakthal fleet entered Imperial space, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Billions of sensors lit up across the border regions, and every Imperial outpost went into full alert. The unknown fleet, which had been a dark shadow until now, finally revealed itself. Massive ships shaped like twisted metal creatures drifted silently through space. They were unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. Their surfaces moved and pulsed like living skin, glowing with strange blue veins of energy. The Empire's admirals stared at the first live images in disbelief. It was like looking at a nightmare made real. The first battle began at the edge of the Orion Belt. The Empire sent a massive defense fleet, 5,000 warships, hundreds of bombers and several dreadnoughts to intercept the enemy. These were some of the most powerful ships in the galaxy, each armed with weapons that could destroy planets. The admirals believed this would be a quick victory. The Empire had never lost a war in its modern history. They expected the Varakthal to fall easily under the firepower of their great fleet. But they were wrong. As the two forces approached, silence filled the communication channels. The Varakthal sent no signal, no demand, no warning. Then, without a single word, they attacked. The darkness of space exploded with light. Thousands of beams of pure energy tore through the Imperial formation. The first wave of ships was obliterated in seconds. The enemy's weapons burned through the Empire's strongest shields as if they were made of glass. The Imperial commanders shouted orders, trying to regroup, but their ships were falling apart faster than they could react. Inside the command center on the Imperial flagship, officers scrambled to understand what was happening. "Their energy readings are off the charts," one shouted. "Shields at 70%, no 60-50. Another officer tried to jam the enemy's targeting systems, but nothing worked. The Emperor clenched his fists, his voice cold and steady. "Then we must give them something unpredictable," he said. He ordered the activation of older fleets, ancient warships that hadn't seen battle in centuries. These ships, though outdated by modern standards, used systems so old that no one believed the Varakthal could predict their behavior. The order shocked the council. Those vessels were relics from another age, their technology primitive compared to the Empire's newer designs. But the Emperor had no choice. The new had failed. Perhaps the old held some forgotten strength. While engineers worked to reactivate the ancient ships, the battles across the galaxy continued. One by one, the border systems fell. Imperial colonies were wiped out without warning. Entire planets disappeared from the network, their last messages filled with static and screams. The Varakthal didn't conquer. They destroyed. Their purpose was not to rule but to erase. The Empire began to realize that this wasn't just a war, it was extermination. Admiral Varen took command of the defense at the Vega sector, one of the most strategic gateways into Imperial space. The Imperial fleet there was massive, over 10,000 ships, including the resurrected dreadnoughts from the early Empire. These old giants, with their heavy armor and outdated systems, stood beside sleek modern destroyers, forming a strange mix of past and present. As the Varakthal approached, the Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the dark horizon. "This is where we make our stand," he said quietly. When the battle began, space itself seemed to shake. The Varakthal ships appeared out of nowhere, their forms shifting and glowing with deadly light. The Empire opened fire with everything it had. Thousands of plasma bolts streaked through space, hitting the enemy fleet directly. Explosions filled the void, and for a moment, it seemed as if the Empire had finally struck a decisive blow. But then the impossible happened. The destroyed Varakthal ships began to rebuild themselves. Shattered fragments pulled back together, reforming into whole vessels again. The crews watching screamed in disbelief. "They're regenerating!" someone shouted. The battle turned into chaos. Imperial ships fought desperately, firing non-stop, trying to keep the enemy from reaching their lines. Dreadnoughts released waves of missiles that lit up the darkness like 1,000 suns. Still, the Varakthal kept coming. Their weapons were strange, streams of dark energy that seemed to bend space itself, slicing through anything they touched. Imperial ships vanished into glowing cracks in space, never to return. Despite the overwhelming odds, Admiral Varen refused to surrender. He ordered the ancient dreadnoughts to advance. These massive ships, forgotten relics of a darker time, moved forward slowly but with unstoppable force. Their armor, made of alloys no longer used in modern designs, withstood the enemy's first waves of attack. Then they opened fire. The shockwave from their cannons was so powerful it disrupted local gravity fields. Several Varakthal ships were torn apart in the blast. The Imperial crews cheered for the first time in weeks. The old weapons still had power. The dreadnoughts continued to fight, their ancient systems glowing with life after centuries of silence. One of them, the Oblivion Lance, charged into the heart of the enemy formation, firing all its weapons at once. The explosion was so massive that it created a temporary rift in space. Dozens of enemy ships vanished in the light, but as the dust settled, the Oblivion Lance was gone too, destroyed in the blast. Admiral Varen watched in silence, knowing that heroes had just been born and lost in that single act of defiance. The battle raged for hours. The Empire lost hundreds of ships, but for every one that fell, they took down several enemy vessels. It wasn't victory, but it was resistance. For the first time, the Varakthal retreated, withdrawing into deep space. The Imperial soldiers erupted in cheers. Messages of hope spread through the fleet. "We stopped them. The old ships worked." But beneath the celebration, everyone knew the truth. The Varakthal hadn't been defeated. They had only pulled back to study their new enemy again. After the battle, Admiral Varen sent a private report to the Emperor. He explained that the Varakthal were unlike anything the Empire had faced. "They are not simply machines," he wrote. "They learn. They remember. They are evolving during battle." The Emperor read the report in silence. He understood what it meant. The next time the Varakthal attacked, they would be even stronger. In the following days, the Empire tried to rebuild its defenses. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair damaged ships and upgrade old technology. The scientists studied fragments of destroyed Varakthal vessels, but what they found was disturbing. The material wasn't metal, it was alive. It responded to light, sound, and even touch. The Varakthal ships weren't built, they were grown. The Empire's greatest minds couldn't understand how such technology was possible. Some whispered that it wasn't technology at all, but something more. A fusion of machine and life that defied every known law of science. On the front lines, soldiers began to share stories of strange sightings. After battles, they claimed to hear whispers through their comm systems, even when all channels were off. Voices that weren't human. Some said they saw shapes moving in the wreckage, pieces of the destroyed enemy ships crawling back together, as if the battlefield itself was alive. Fear began to grow again. Back at the Imperial capital, the Emperor stood before a massive hologram showing the state of the war. The Empire's territories were shrinking, and the Varakthal presence was spreading like a dark infection. Yet, in the middle of this despair, a new hope began to form. The engineers reported that one of the ancient command ships, long thought lost, had been reactivated deep in a forgotten shipyard. It carried systems that didn't exist in modern designs, weapons and engines that predated even the oldest Imperial archives. As the Emperor looked at the flickering hologram of the ship, he felt a strange sense of fate. Perhaps the key to survival was hidden in the Empire's forgotten past. The modern fleets had failed, but maybe those who came before had known how to fight this enemy. Far away in the darkness of space, the Varakthal watched and waited, their ships gathered like storm clouds on the edge of reality. Their goal was clear. They were preparing for the next strike. The Empire had survived the first great battle, but the real war was only beginning. And this time, the enemy would not stop until every trace of the Galactic Empire was erased from the stars. The Empire's situation had grown desperate. The Varakthal fleet, a force beyond comprehension, had proven time and again that modern Imperial ships and weapons alone could not stop them. Entire fleets had been destroyed and the Empire's borders were shrinking fast. Panic gripped the command centers, but amid the fear, hope began to stir in the most unexpected place. A hidden fleet, long erased from Imperial records, that had slept quietly for centuries. These were the unrecorded ships, relics of an ancient war, their existence so secret that even many high-ranking officers had no knowledge of them. They had been kept hidden in deep space or in forgotten shipyards, dormant and silent, waiting for a time the Empire could not imagine. Admiral Varen was the first to propose reactivating these old ships. At first, the suggestion was met with skepticism and disbelief. How could vessels that were decades, even centuries old, match the power and speed of the Varakthal fleet? The Council feared it was a desperate gamble, but with every passing day, the Varakthal attacks became more aggressive. There was no choice. Orders were sent to uncover and reactivate every unrecorded vessel still accessible. Engineers, historians, and retired officers descended on hidden shipyards across the Empire, unlocking ancient codes and bypassing security systems that had been left untouched for generations. When the first unrecorded dreadnoughts were powered up, the effect was almost magical. Massive ships that had been frozen in time roared to life, their engines thrumming with a deep resonant power. Hulls that had been weathered and worn in long-forgotten battles gleamed once more, repaired with technologies unknown to the modern engineers. The command AI of each vessel, ancient and autonomous, came online, analyzing the current situation and immediately identifying the enemy. For the first time in months, the Empire had a fighting chance. These ships were not part of modern strategy. They had fought the Varakthal before, during a time that no living Imperial officer had witnessed. The first engagement of the unrecorded fleet was cautious. Several dreadnoughts, massive and imposing, moved to intercept a Varakthal raiding party that had been attacking a border system. Modern Imperial ships provided support, their new weapons augmenting the older vessels. As the unrecorded ships engaged, the Varakthal seemed confused. Their adaptive tactics, which had destroyed so many modern fleets, struggled against these unfamiliar vessels. The dreadnoughts moved with precision, anticipating the enemy's strikes and countering them with methods that were lost to contemporary military science. Energy beams and plasma bolts fired from their cannons found their marks with deadly accuracy. In minutes, the raiding party was shattered, their ships reduced to drifting wreckage. The Imperial officers watching from command centers were stunned. The forgotten ships were succeeding where the newest fleets had failed. News of the unrecorded fleet's effectiveness spread quickly. The Emperor issued a personal order to deploy every available ancient ship to the front lines. Within days, dozens of dreadnoughts and heavy cruisers long believed lost emerged from hidden bays and remote depots. Each ship had a story, a history that had been erased from the official records. Some had fought in secret wars on distant worlds. Others had been used in classified operations against enemies whose names had been stricken from Imperial memory. Now they had a new purpose, to confront the Varakthal and protect the Empire. As the unrecorded fleet moved toward the Varakthal, The first major battle began in the Seraphim sector. The enemy had assembled one of its largest formations yet, intending to crush the Imperial defenses completely. The modern Imperial fleet, battered from previous encounters, fell in behind the ancient ships. When the unrecorded fleet engaged, the battlefield changed instantly. The dreadnoughts fired volleys of energy that split space itself. Some weapons were unfamiliar even to the most experienced engineers. Graviton projectors, plasma lances, and particle displacers that had been removed from all modern designs because they were considered too dangerous. The Varakthal ships tried their usual tactics, but for the first time their maneuvers were anticipated and countered. Explosions ripped through their ranks and the tide of battle shifted dramatically. One of the unrecorded dreadnoughts, the Eternal Sentinel, moved to the center of the enemy formation. Its massive engines pulsed with energy as it unleashed a concentrated barrage of weapons that no Varakthal ship could survive. The blast tore through the alien fleet like a scythe through wheat. Ships that had once seemed invincible were reduced to glowing fragments drifting in the void. Pilots and admirals could barely believe their eyes. The enemy that had terrified the galaxy for months was now faltering under the firepower of ships that had been erased from the Empire's history. The battle continued for hours, and the unrecorded fleet's tactics began to reveal their full genius. Each ship operated independently, yet as part of a larger strategy, anticipating the movements of the Varakthal in ways modern fleets could not. They struck hard, then withdrew, regrouping to attack from unexpected angles. Their weapon systems, though old, were calibrated to exploit weaknesses that no contemporary engineer had even considered. Slowly but surely, the Varakthal were being forced to retreat, their adaptive technology struggling to keep pace with the combination of ancient experience and modern support. Admiral Varen watched from his command vessel, amazed. For weeks he had led fleets against the Varakthal with little success. He had studied every tactic, every technological advantage, yet nothing had worked. Now watching the unrecorded fleet in action, he understood why these ships had been hidden. They weren't just vessels. They were living records of past victories, carrying centuries of combat experience coded into their AI systems. The Varakthal had faced these ships before, and somehow, the knowledge had never left them. They remembered the enemy, and now the enemy remembered them. As the battle reached its climax, the Varakthal fleet made a desperate final assault. Their ships swarmed the unrecorded fleet, attempting to overwhelm it with sheer numbers. For a moment, it seemed as though the Empire's hope might be extinguished. But then the dreadnoughts responded with a coordination that defied belief. The Eternal Sentinel led a charge into the heart of the enemy formation, while other ships flanked and attacked from multiple directions. Energy shields flared and collapsed. Hulls groaned under pressure, and the void lit up with the glow of countless explosions. One by one, the Varakthal ships began to fall. Entire squadrons vanished as the ancient fleet unleashed a final, overwhelming strike. By the end of the battle, the Varakthal fleet was shattered. The survivors fled, retreating into deep space, leaving behind wreckage that would drift for decades. The Empire's modern fleet, though damaged, had survived, supported and inspired by the unrecorded ships that had returned from the shadows of history. The victory was decisive, not just in military terms, but in morale. The soldiers and officers of the Empire saw that even in the face of an enemy, thought unstoppable, there were tools and allies they had forgotten. Forces that had waited silently for the moment to turn the tide. After the battle, the Emperor convened a council. The unrecorded fleet's success had changed everything. Analysts began recording what little information remained about the ships, trying to preserve their knowledge for future generations. Scientists examined the ancient technology, blending it with modern systems to create new weapons and defenses. It became clear that the forgotten fleet was not only a symbol of hope, but also a blueprint for how the Empire could survive the future. The ancient ships, though not numerous, had proven that experience and ingenuity could rival even the most advanced technology of the Varakthal. For weeks afterward, the Imperial Navy scoured the sector, collecting fragments of the Varakthal ships. They studied the wreckage, hoping to understand how such a powerful force had grown and adapted in secret. Engineers marveled at the living technology, attempting to reverse engineer it without success. Pilots spoke of the dreadnoughts with reverence, calling them ghosts of the past that had returned to save the Empire. Even historians began rewriting chapters of the Empire's history, acknowledging that sometimes what was erased could return, stronger than anyone had imagined. The unrecorded fleet, having achieved its purpose, returned to its hidden stations. Some ships remained active near key sectors, ready to respond if the Varakthal returned. Others entered stasis, retreating to forgotten shipyards and abandoned spaceports, waiting silently. Their existence remained classified, known only to a few trusted officers and the Emperor himself. The galaxy had seen them in action, but in the records their contribution was almost entirely absent. They were heroes that history had forgotten, yet they had saved the Empire from annihilation. Through it all, the Empire learned a hard lesson. Knowledge alone was not power. The past, even the parts carefully erased, could hold the keys to survival. The Emperor, standing on the balcony of his palace, gazed into the stars and understood that the galaxy was filled with dangers that could return at any time. The unrecorded fleet had proven that even the forgotten could rise again, that ancient strength could turn the tide of war, and that the Empire's survival depended on remembering and respecting its own history, no matter how dark or inconvenient. And somewhere in the dark reaches of space, the Varakthal fleet regrouped. They had been defeated but not destroyed. They would return, stronger and wiser, carrying with them the memory of their last encounter. The stage was set for a war that would test the limits of both civilizations, a war where the forgotten past and the unknown future would collide in ways no one could yet predict. The Empire, for the first time in generations, understood that victory was not guaranteed, but it had found hope in the most unlikely of places, ghosts of history, returning to defend what had been almost lost. When the last remnants of the Varakthal fleet retreated, the galaxy was quiet again, but the silence was uneasy. The Imperial forces had survived, and the unrecorded fleet had proven its unmatched power. Yet the Empire knew this was not the end. The Varakthal were not a force that could be completely destroyed. They were survivors, adaptable and relentless, and their next attack could come at any moment. Across the Imperial sectors, soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike began to assess the aftermath, realizing the scope of what had just occurred. Entire battlefields were littered with the wreckage of enemy ships and Imperial vessels alike. Systems that had once thrived were left in ruins, and millions of lives had been lost. Despite the victory, the Empire was forever changed. In the Imperial Command Center, officers worked tirelessly to analyze what had happened. Debriefings filled the halls, holographic displays showed the locations of destroyed enemy ships, and strategists attempted to understand why the unrecorded fleet had been so effective. The conclusion was undeniable. These ancient ships, forgotten and erased from every record, had turned the tide of battle. They possessed strategies, systems, and capabilities that the modern fleet could not replicate. The Empire realized that while technology was important, experience and history carried a power of their own, something that even the most advanced new ships could not match. The Emperor convened a private council to discuss the next steps. "We have survived," he said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "But survival is not victory. The Varakthal will return. They are patient, they adapt, and they remember. We must prepare not only to defend but to understand." His words were met with solemn nods. The Empire had learned that the galaxy was full of unknowns, and that threats could emerge from shadows no record could illuminate. For centuries, the Imperial archives had seemed perfect, complete, and all-knowing. Now those archives were revealed to be incomplete, and the Empire understood the danger of forgetting its past. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Imperial engineers and historians worked together to catalog the unrecorded fleet. Every weapon system, every defense protocol, every AI command program was documented and analyzed. Engineers marveled at how ancient technology, long thought obsolete, had not only survived but excelled against the Varakthal. Historians pieced together fragments of the long-erased wars, discovering how these ships had been built, how they had fought, and why they had been hidden. Slowly, the Empire began to weave these forgotten threads into its current strategy. It was as though history itself had returned to guide them. The soldiers who had fought alongside the unrecorded fleet became legends overnight. Veterans told stories of the dreadnought's incredible maneuvers, their AI anticipating attacks with perfect precision, their weapons striking with devastating accuracy. Pilots described seeing ships rise from hidden bays, almost as if they had come alive in response to the crisis. These stories spread across the fleet, inspiring hope and determination. Even the most battle-weary officers felt renewed courage. The Empire had seen its darkest hour, yet from that darkness had come a reminder that strength could be found where it was least expected. Yet despite the celebration, the Emperor and his council understood that the threat had not been eliminated. The Varakthal were still out there, somewhere beyond the edges of known space, regrouping and learning from their defeat. Analysts warned that their next attack would be more coordinated, more powerful, and potentially even more devastating. The Empire's survival depended not on chance but on preparation. Every planet, every shipyard, every fleet was now put on high alert. Military exercises were intensified, and the training of new pilots accelerated. The unrecorded fleet, though few in number, became the blueprint for a new defensive doctrine. In secret, the Emperor ordered the construction of new vessels that combined the lessons of both ancient and modern technology. Engineers experimented with designs inspired by the unrecorded fleet's hulls, weapons, and AI systems, creating hybrid ships capable of countering the Varakthal's adaptive strategies. These new ships, although modern, carried echoes of the past. The wisdom of battles long forgotten now merged with the Empire's latest innovations. The goal was clear: to ensure that when the Varakthal returned, the Empire would be ready, stronger than ever before. As the Empire rebuilt, the citizens began to understand the magnitude of the events. News of the battles spread slowly, carefully curated to maintain morale. People across worlds celebrated the bravery of those who had fought and survived, yet they were also reminded of the fragility of their civilization. The unrecorded fleet had saved them, yes, but it had also revealed the limits of Imperial knowledge. The lesson was profound. Forgetting history was dangerous, and vigilance was eternal. Stories of the battles became part of the oral histories, whispered in training halls and command centers, even if official records left them unmentioned. In the frontier sectors, crews of the surviving fleets patrolled space more carefully than ever. Sensor arrays were upgraded, reconnaissance missions increased, and protocols for unknown threats were rewritten. The soldiers who had seen the Varakthal firsthand knew that the galaxy was no longer a place of certainty. Every shadow could conceal a hidden enemy, and every quiet system could hide a surprise. Fear remained, but so did resilience. The Empire had survived the impossible, and its people were determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Meanwhile, the Varakthal themselves were regrouping in the distant void. They had suffered losses, but their technology adapted, and their strategy evolved. Intelligence gathered by Imperial spies suggested that they had already begun developing new tactics, incorporating the lessons learned from their defeat. The Empire knew that these creatures were patient, capable of waiting centuries if necessary to strike again. Yet the Emperor and his commanders were no longer unprepared. They had learned the value of history, of experience, and of forces that had once been hidden. As months passed, the Imperial fleet grew stronger. Ancient dreadnoughts were refurbished and integrated into the active fleet. Hybrid vessels combining old and new designs were deployed in key sectors. Strategic command centers incorporated lessons from the past, preparing for encounters the Empire had once thought impossible. The unrecorded fleet, though largely hidden again, remained ready to respond at a moment's notice, a silent guardian of the galaxy. Its very presence reminded the Empire of what it had almost lost, and what it must never forget again. The Emperor, observing from his palace, often reflected on the strange turn of events. The galaxy had tested the Empire with an enemy it had erased from memory, and the lessons had been harsh. Yet through this trial, the Empire had found strength in what was forgotten. Ghosts from the past had returned to save the present, teaching that knowledge, vigilance, and respect for history were the true foundations of power. The Emperor understood that this experience would shape the future of the galaxy, ensuring that the Empire remained alert and prepared for the next unknown threat. Even in the farthest reaches of Imperial space, whispers of the unrecorded fleet endured. Pilots, engineers, and soldiers shared stories of the dreadnought's incredible feats, of ships reactivated after centuries of silence, of battles where the impossible became reality. These stories inspired new generations, reminding everyone that the Empire's strength was not solely in its technology, but in its history, its people, and the lessons learned from both. The unrecorded fleet became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies in what is forgotten. And though the Varakthal had been driven back, their presence remained a shadow over the galaxy. The Empire knew that the enemy would return, perhaps stronger and more cunning than before. But for the first time, the Empire was not afraid. It had seen the impossible and survived. It had learned that even a force erased from history could rise to defend civilization. The galaxy had witnessed the unrecorded fleet's power, and the Empire had been reminded that its survival depended not only on might, but on memory, preparation, and courage. The victory was not just a battle won. It was a lesson learned. The Empire, forever changed by the events, vowed to remain vigilant. The unrecorded fleet returned to the shadows, silent but ready, carrying with it the wisdom of ages past. And as the stars shone across the vast galaxy, one truth became clear. The past, even when forgotten, could shape the future. The Empire had survived, the enemy had been repelled, and the galaxy had learned that the forgotten could return, not as a threat, but as salvation. The Empire's story, though scarred by war and loss, continued, strengthened by the knowledge that the impossible could be overcome when the past and present fought together.